Please be advised, this episode does have content that some may find distressing. As always, listener discretion is advised and it is not suitable for anyone under the age of 13. Please be aware that this episode does contain reference to sexual assault and rape. Hello and welcome to episode 18 of It's Murder Up North. Today's episode is my first listener suggested case. So I'd like to say thank you to Si. I am honoured to be covering this case for Si, as it has a special connection for him. He grew up in the area in which the crime occurred and served the local community as a police officer. I am a true crime addict, but even I can miss a story that needs telling. Therefore, if you have a case you would like me to cover, please contact me either on the It's Murder Up North Facebook page or on Twitter. I just want to say thank you to everyone who has left some wonderful reviews for the show. This podcast is a labour of love, so to read such kind words is appreciated. If you have enjoyed the show, please help spread the word by leaving a 5-star review wherever you listen. It really does help to grow the podcast. You can also support the show by becoming a Patreon member. Sign up today for exclusive content at patreon.com/It's Murder Up North. It's time for a quick shout out to my podcast of the week. Please check out Lisa's show, Texla True Crime Podcast. Her show is brilliant and her accent is amazing. Here's a sneak peek.
Hey y'all, it's Lisa from Texla True Crime. I've got a brand new podcast that covers homicides, missing people, and well, anything that I want to talk about in Texas and Louisiana. I do tell some jokes and I do try to keep it kind of light, but at the end of the day, we're trying to give voices back to the people who no longer have them and to bring stories that have kind of fallen out of the limelight back into it. I hope you'll join me. You can find me on iTunes or wherever you download your podcasts. Bye y'all. I hope you're hearing from me soon.
Now, let's head to the episode. Bury is a town in the northwest of England and the birthplace of Robert Peel, who would serve as British Prime Minister twice during Queen Victoria's reign. He was also known as the father of the modern police force, having founded the Metropolitan Police on the 29th of September 1829, which earned the earliest serving officers the nicknames Peelers or Bobbies. An assassination attempt on Robert Peel's life did change the law with the formation of the Insanity Defence. High on the hillside overlooking the town of Bury stands a monument to its most famous son. The town itself has undergone many changes since Robert Peel's day. It has gone from a hive of cotton mills during the Industrial Revolution, with thick smog hanging in the air, to a major remodernisation project, which began in the 1960s with its old mills being demolished, along with many of the shops and houses. As part of the modernisation, a new shopping precinct and bus interchange was constructed in the 1980s, allowing people to travel to and from the town via bus and the electric trams. The town is popular with shoppers who visit its world-famous market, which was established 600 years ago. It is famous for its black puddings, which is delicious as part of a full English breakfast. The town is also a popular place to live for commuters, with its abundant transport links to most areas of Manchester and beyond. This made the bus interchange a busy place to be, with thousands of people arriving and departing each day, which makes what happened on January the 6th, 1994, even more shocking. Shirley Leach was a 66-year-old mother of two and a loving grandmother. She had been widowed in 1992 after losing her husband to cancer. She was a petite lady, being just 5'2", with short brown permed hair. She was by all accounts timid and shy, but her loving nature shone through. While the world was celebrating the dawn of a new year, Shirley's daughter Beryl had been rushed to Fairfield Hospital on New Year's Eve 1993. Her loving mother travelled to visit her every day, having to catch 2 buses to get there. The 6th of January was no different. Shirley left her house on Holmes Avenue in Bury. She popped by to visit her neighbour Joan, to drop off a parcel and have a chat, before heading off to catch the bus into Bury. When she arrived, she met with her only grandson Darren, whom she was very close to. The 2 of them went shopping. They visited a number of shops, including a music store. Darren described his grandmother's love of current music, highlighting that she knew more about most of the artists than he did, and he stated that she was young at heart. After their short shopping trip, they boarded the bus to visit Darren's mum at Fairfield Hospital. Following the visit, while waiting for the bus back to the interchange, Darren and Shirley stopped at a pub for a drink. With his mum being in hospital, Shirley gave Darren a carrier bag of food. She was a loving grandmother, who would have done anything for her 17-year-old grandson, and she was a great comfort to him while his mum was in hospital. The 2 of them boarded the bus to Bury. Darren alighted at his stop and waved bye to his grandmother as the bus pulled away and disappeared into the dark night. At roughly 9:10, the bus arrived at Bury Interchange. Shirley rushed to catch her connecting bus, but upon arriving at the stand, she learned that it had already departed, and the next one would be due at around 10:25. With half an hour to spare, Shirley made her way to the opposite side of the interchange to visit the toilets. It was a well-lit area, and still busy with people coming and going, from work and their day out shopping. Near to the toilets, a group of teenagers stood chatting, with their backs to the entrance. They did not see the elderly lady enter the toilets. They did, however, hear a loud scream that came from the direction of the ladies' toilets. The teenagers were curious about who had made the noise, but they shrugged it off as someone probably just messing around and continued to chat amongst themselves. The buses came and went, and people continued to move to and from the bus interchange, unaware of anything untoward. It was only at 4:15 the following morning when a couple who had been on a night out stopped at the toilets. While her partner went to the men's room, the 26-year-old woman headed into the ladies'. She stopped by the mirror to check her hair and makeup before proceeding to the only cubicle that was unlocked. The door was slightly ajar, and as she pushed it open, she was confronted with a horrific sight. There on the floor lay the naked and bloody body of an elderly lady. It was suspected that Shirley had been brutally assaulted. Her clothes had been removed, she had been raped and then strangled. The post-mortem also revealed that she had been mutilated with what was believed to be a broken bottle. This had been used to remove her breast. The mutilation had occurred around half an hour after Shirley had died. It was suspected that the culprit had returned to the scene and removed the breast in order to destroy evidence that could have linked him to the crime, possibly because he had bitten his victim. The horrific murder of this frail, elderly woman, who was just heading home from visiting her sick daughter, stunned the community, especially due to the location and manner of her death. Tragically, this was the first time Shirley had missed her connecting bus in the 2 weeks she had been making the trip to the hospital. And on every other occasion, she had been with a family member. But on that cold winter's night, on January the 6th, she was running late and was alone. The killer had been brazen enough to carry out this attack at a busy transport hub. The police hoped that surely someone must have seen or heard something that would help catch the perpetrator. Police appealed for witnesses and tried to develop a picture of what had occurred that night. The first key witness was a woman who had been at the interchange at roughly 8:30. She was approached by a man who started to chat to her and asked for a cigarette. Something about him made her nervous, and instead of continuing to wait for her bus, she decided to get a taxi instead. She was, however, able to provide a detailed description of the man, from which an e-fit was produced. At approximately 9:05, just 5 minutes before Shirley arrived at the bus interchange, another witness observed a man acting strangely near the toilets. The witness described this man as being between 40 and 50 years old, wearing a flat cap, beige coat, black trousers and shoes, and had a black bag over his right shoulder. The witness noted that once this man saw him, he turned away from the toilets and headed off in the opposite direction. 2 cleaners from Fairfield Hospital were caught alighting from the same bus as Shirley. They recognised her from her visits to her daughter, and they had a conversation with the 66-year-old, following which they observed her heading towards the toilets, but did not see or hear anything after that. And the teenagers, who heard the scream at roughly 9:25, sadly they had their backs to the toilets, so they did not see Shirley or her attacker. At 10:20, 2 sisters who had been playing bingo at a nearby bingo hall arrived at the interchange. They noticed a man acting suspiciously at the entrance to the ladies' toilets. His body language was unnerving as he disappeared into the ladies'. Unfortunately, the sisters only saw the man from the back, but they were able to estimate his height as being between 5'6" to 5'9", and he was wearing dark clothing. There is a Crime Watch reconstruction, and the moment in which they show this man hanging around the ladies' toilets is very creepy. I will leave a link in the show notes so that you can watch the reconstruction for yourself. At 10:10, a man in dark clothing, wearing a flat cap, was witnessed crossing the interchange holding a bloodied tissue against his nose. However, the witness did not see where this man went. Despite how busy the area was at the time, no one noticed the man leaving the toilets or saw him leave the interchange. And with multiple options for the suspect to leave the area via foot, taxi, bus or tram, it was possible that he could have gone anywhere. The police did appeal for witnesses to come forward through press conferences, a poster, and a reconstruction on BBC's Crime Watch UK. The appeals led to hundreds of people being questioned, in the hope that the smallest clue could lead to the big break in the case. Forensics teams had retrieved blood from the scene, which was ruled out as belonging to Shirley, and matched saliva that had been found on her body. Although still in its infancy, the police decided to use DNA fingerprinting to see if they could identify the killer. But in the time before the National DNA Database, and prior to the routine collection of offenders' DNA, it led nowhere. Just like in the case from last week's episode of Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth, an operation was launched to take fingerprints and blood samples from men in the Bury area. More than 800 men had blood samples taken, yet the guilty party was not found. On May the 19th, police issued CCTV stills to the press, featuring a man who appeared to be bald on the crown of his head, with bushy hair at the sides. Police wished to question this man in connection with the incident, as they had tracked down security footage that placed him at the interchange. The first sighting of this person of interest was at a garage located close to the bus interchange where he was seen shopping. An hour later, the same man is seen running within 200 yards of the bus interchange around the time of the attack. The police highlighted that this man's right arm was swinging loosely at his side as he ran, as though it was possibly immobile. Although it was never confirmed who this man was, There was a local man who bore a striking resemblance to the image, and it was known that he had a prosthetic right hand. However, this man denied being in Bury at the time of the incident, and police were able to verify this. Sadly, this did not stop him suffering being verbally and physically abused by people who suspected him of killing Shirley Leach. Despite the thousands of hours of police work and the media appeals, the police were unable to generate any new leads in the case, and slowly the investigation wound down. Shirley Leach met her death in a horrific manner. Her attacker was described by police as someone who was very dangerous and mentally disturbed. For me, the disgusting nature of her murder was compounded by the dismal location in which the attack occurred. The toilet cubicle in which she was killed was dark, with brown tiles on the walls and floor. The space was so narrow, she would have had no chance of escape. Seeing pictures of where she spent her last moments, on a cold, hard floor of a public restroom, with the smell of urine and excrement filling her last breaths, is genuinely heartbreaking. And I fully understand how the police believed someone with mental issues had committed such a heinous crime. As the years ticked by with no new leads, the detective in charge of her case, Detective Superintendent Bill Roberts, retired in the year 2000. Filled with the regret that he was unable to apprehend Shirley Leach's murderer. He had never given up, but he had exhausted every avenue of inquiry. He was always under the belief that someone capable of such a brutal crime would likely have been responsible for other criminal offences, but he was unable to prove this theory. He stated, quote, "To commit a horrendous offence like this, and then not reoffend for more than a decade is extremely unusual. I honestly believed that Shirley's murderer was dead or had left the country." Sometimes offenders are caught purely by chance, either through their own mistakes or when apprehended for another crime. David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, was caught thanks to him blocking a fire hydrant near to one of his murder scenes. He was issued a parking ticket for this violation, which ultimately led to his arrest. Dennis Nielsen was caught when the discarded remains of his victims caused a blockage in the drains outside the flats where he lived, and BTK, Dennis Rader, couldn't resist taunting the police by sending them a floppy disk that led them straight to his front door. After 12 years of evading capture, time was running out for Shirley Leach's killer. On the 18th of February 2006, a police officer stopped a car in the Moston area of Manchester. It was a routine traffic stop. The driver was suspected of driving while under the influence of alcohol, and when he failed the roadside breath test, he was arrested and taken to the police station. Thanks to a change in legislation in 2001, the drink driver was fingerprinted and a blood sample was taken. This was subsequently added to the National DNA database and checked against any outstanding offences. The results came back as a match to the saliva and blood spots found at the scene of Shirley Leach's murder. A simple traffic stop helped catch the elusive killer. The drink driver was Ian O'Callaghan. At the time of his drink drive arrest, he lived on Rugby Avenue, which was just half a mile away from Holme Avenue, where Shirley had lived with her son Gary. He was married with a family of his own, but was suspected he had a criminal record. But there was a good reason he hadn't been connected to the murder sooner, which was explained by Detective Inspector Jeff Arnold from the Cold Case Review Unit, who stated, "This case is an example of how DNA technology has improved over the past decade. Even if the culprit had been arrested on suspicion of a more minor offence back in the 90s, a DNA sample would not have been taken, as it was not normal procedure to do this. Even if it had, it would not have generated an automatic match with the DNA found at the murder scene, because it wasn't possible to search through a national database. Ian O'Callaghan had a history of sexual offences, starting when he was just 16 years old. In 1984, he sexually assaulted a 46-year-old woman after he broke into her home one night while she was asleep. 8 years later, while he was in Lancaster serving with the Territorial Army, he was convicted for assaulting another woman. He had returned to Bury by 1994 and was working at a factory that made road traffic cones. His home was just 20 minutes away from the bus interchange. Following the murder, his offending did not subside, as in October of 1994 he was convicted of indecent exposure when he stood at the window of his home and showed his genitals to a 19-year-old girl and her 2 younger siblings. He was also given a caution for common assault after rendering a woman unconscious in a pub after punching her. It is horrific to think that such a violent sexual predator could be out in the community. Part of me wonders how much of his criminal history his wife had knowledge of. Did she truly know the man she was married to? Or was she another one of his victims? Who knows what happens behind closed doors? Ian O'Callaghan denied any involvement in the murder from the moment he was arrested. He stated he had never been into the ladies' toilets, but he could not recall where he was that night, arguing that how can anybody possibly remember what they were doing 12 years ago? When questioned how his blood and saliva was found at the murder scene, he was unable to provide any explanation. During a cold case review, one of the names on the suspect list was a relative of O'Callaghan's, which suggests that the net was closing in on the suspect. So even if he hadn't been caught drink driving, it is possible he would have been identified further down the line. In November 2006, 38-year-old Ian O'Callaghan was sentenced to a minimum term of 28 years for the murder of Shirley Leach. This, however, was not the end of the story. In 2016, O'Callaghan's face appeared in a newspaper, awaking terrible memories in one victim that had been kept hidden for 15 years. She had recently become a mother, and she felt that she needed to speak up in order to heal and be able to be the mother she really wanted to be. In September 2001, the victim was just 11 years old, when a man exposed himself to her. The girl ran away shouting for her mum, who quickly appeared from the house, but the man had disappeared. A couple of days later, she saw the same man, and she testified to the police that, quote, he walked past me. I kind of did a sigh of relief because he didn't look at me. But he put both his hands on my shoulder and dragged me into the back street. It was daylight, but no one was around. He pushed me down onto the floor. I could feel his breath on the side of my face. He was in his work uniform, which was dark blue, and had a bag which he carried on the side. I didn't even try to move. I didn't know what to do. I just looked up at the sky and just turned away. I remember just staring at all the little lines on the gate, so I didn't have to concentrate. I didn't tell anyone because I was too scared. He said he'd kill me, and you could tell in his eyes that he meant it. He taunted the terrified girl by saying, "Let's see if you can keep this one a secret." It was a revenge attack for the girl telling her mother about him exposing himself. He got off her with a smirk on his face, and as he left her lying there in the alleyway, she was sobbing. She continued to tell the police that she just lay there, frightened in case he returned, and then she got herself up. She went back to the house and straight upstairs, fearful of telling anyone. She did not tell her parents about the rape, because she genuinely believed that the defendant would kill her. But her ordeal didn't end there. It wasn't just the physical attack, but it was the mental trauma that she suffered following it. He was working as a bus driver, and so whenever her family would travel on the buses around Bury, often he was the one driving the bus. The girl remembered a time she went on a trip with her mother, quote, "We were waiting for the bus. My heart sank when I saw that he was driving, and I remember saying I don't want to get on. I remember being so angry at my mum when she went over the road to speak to his girlfriend." Being the victim of a rape is devastating, and many find it difficult to come to terms with what has happened to them. It's not only the physical attack, it's the mental impact and the detrimental effect it can have on normal life. Living in constant fear, being unable to trust people, and the self-loathing that can come following an attack. Sadly, individuals who have been raped still feel they are unable to report the assault, and there are many reasons for this. The fear they may not be believed, fear of reprisals from their attacker, victim blaming, guilt, and shame. I do want to say that if you have been a victim of sexual assault, there are people who can help and support you. You do not need to suffer alone. I've provided details in the show notes for who you can contact. Following years of being afraid to go anywhere alone and confiding in people who did not believe her, and after already giving evidence at a case that had resulted in a retrial, the 28-year-old stood in the dock and once again gave evidence against the man who had left her living in fear. On the 6th of September 2019, the 28-year-old watched as Ian O'Callaghan was sentenced for 15 years for the sexual assault. Judge Potter, who presided over the case, described him as an offender determined to demean, abuse and significantly harm women, and he noted that he may never be released from custody. He went on to state that O'Callaghan was a predatory offender who preys on vulnerable women to satisfy his own wicked and selfish desires. There is little mitigation, and you have not shown a shred of remorse. While O'Callaghan continued his life as normal since the murder of Shirley Leach, going to work, getting married, having a child, he left in his wake a trail of devastation. Each victim he subjected to his sexual assaults, from the woman he raped in the safety of her own bedroom when he was just 16 years old, the women he violently assaulted, and the girls he exposed himself to. He destroyed the lives of Shirley Leach's family. Having lost their father just 2 years before her murder, Beryl had recovered and left hospital, but both she and her brother Gary had required counselling for trauma, stress and depression. In 1998, Beryl once again fell ill. She was diagnosed with mouth cancer, which was believed to have been induced by the stress of losing her mother. O'Callaghan robbed Darren of his beloved grandmother. I'm sure the young boy spent many restless nights wondering if he could have done something different. What if he had gone to the interchange with her? What if he hadn't gone for a drink at the pub? Or maybe if they'd caught an earlier bus? The truth is, there was no way to predict what happened to Shirley Leach. No one could have anticipated that such a brutal attack could occur in a busy area, nor could they foresee that the attacker would be so brazen to attack an elderly woman in a public toilet, where he could have been caught so easily by someone just going to use the facilities. I also have to applaud the bravery of the girl who survived his rape. She truly is a survivor, and I really hope that now her attacker is behind bars, she can heal and enjoy being an amazing mother to her child, for whom she took the step to confront her pain. This case haunted Berry for a long time. It is an unnerving thing to consider that this man was able to continue living in the community. He was driving them round on buses and walking the streets not far from his victims and their families' homes. For such a prolific and violent offender, whose victims' ages ranged from just 11 years old up to the age of 66, it is hard not to wonder if he has more victims out there that have either not come forward or have not yet been connected to him. Thank you for joining me for episode 18 of It's Murder Up North. This was definitely a case that shows the depravity that can exist in the world. But it does also highlight that sometimes these vile people can be caught when they least expect it, and that we do possess the strength and courage to face our past. I would love to know your thoughts on this case or any other case that I have covered. Once again, I do want to thank Sai for suggesting I tell Shirley Leach's story. If you have a case you would like me to cover, just drop me a message on Twitter or Facebook. Episode 19 will be available on Sunday. So in the meantime, keep an eye on those shadows.